All right. How's that? Does it work?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, I can see it.
Cool. All right, you guys. Well, you can see it big on your home screens when it's posted in a PDF form later this evening. All right. Well, just to resume our discussion, last week we had a brief introduction. We talked about references, which I hope you had a chance to look up on your own. We'll talk about those a little bit more in a moment. And we spent some time talking about the structure of how plants look, their shape, their form, their leaves, how the leaves are arranged, what the margins of the leaves are like. All those different words that refer to the surfaces and whether they're fuzzy or rough or pokey or sticky or whatever. And remember that it was literally a terminology and vocabulary nightmare. But that's why those resources are really helpful, particularly the glossary. So today, we're going to talk again a little bit about references and how some of those references are arranged, how plants are described in those references, the botanical nomenclature. And then we're going to speak about plant families, which is a good way to wrap your head around different groups of plants. And then finally, in preparation for next week, we're going to talk about looking at habitats and understanding how, once you know where you are and what kind of habitat you're in, you'll have 10 steps up on understanding what plants you might see. Likewise, when you see certain plants that you already identify and know, you'll have a fundamental understanding of what your environmental context is, because plants are essentially indicators of their environmental context. And that'll move us into next week and then the final week of really focusing in on different habitat types and what plants, what flowering plants you'll see there. Okay. And why is it not advancing? There we go. All right. So in California, we have, probably about 76 or 7,700 different kinds of species. 6,500 native plants, 222 that are designated by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife as uncommon. They have special designation. And over 2,000 plants that don't have special designation in the state of California, listed by the Endangered Species Act, either federal or state, but they're still considered to be of conservation concern because they're uncommon or they're unique to particular areas, or they only occur in special soil types that sort of by definition make them uncommon. And then we have over 1,000 plants that are not native to California that we consider invasive and species that are undesirable. But I want to get to what makes a native plant. I mean, we talk about native. What does native mean? And it's a, it's a term, an anthropogenic term. And in California plants, it's used to describe any plant that occurred within the confines of our political boundary, that's the state of California, any plant that was found within the state before the time of the first European contact. Whoa, that wasn't very long ago. So this is really sort of a moment in time after which, if anything new showed up, people determined that that was not native to California. So not occurring at the time of the first European visitors. But you can get really sort of philosophical about that and think, well, what about, we had Polynesian visitors, We may have had Eskimo or people of Russian origin or Siberian origin as visitors. So that term of what's native is really kind of mushy. It's defined in the California literature. It's defined by botanists as being plants that were here in our state, or what's California today, at the time of the first European visitors. So it's kind of, I don't know, that's the technical term. Now, what about invasive plants? Invasive plants are weeds. Sometimes weeds can actually be native, like Monterey pines that are native to Central California, can be weedy in a sense. They can invade habitats where they're not wanted. And that's the ticket. Weedy plants are plants that are undesirable in a particular place. So in my garden, I actually sometimes pull California poppies because they behave in a weedy way. And even though this picture is stunningly beautiful and I love how they flower and they're great for pollinators, sometimes I pull them out because they just get too dense and thick. So they're undesirable in my context. Now, invasive plants are plants that will take over habitat to the detriment of the native species that otherwise would be occurring in that habitat. So invasive plants are undesirable because they do some kind of harm in taking over the habitat and the resources for what otherwise would be native. And all of these are human constructs. All of these are ways that we have developed to talk about plants that are either native or not native, as of a certain date, weedy that are behaving in a certain way, or invasive plants that we don't want because they are taking over habitat to the detriment of other natives. And I think I hear my fan coming on. I hope it's not too loud. So when we talk about California native plants, the Jepson manual is about 2.5 inches thick. It is a reference that was actually first published in 2012. It, at that time, contained a list or a flora, a list of California native plants that were known at that time. The minute it was published, it was outdated because people would go out and find new things. And also taxonomists are those people who organize taxa, organize living things into categories and classifications, would revise the organization of how plants and animals were grouped based on genetics, based on developing techniques, things like DNA sequencing. So the minute a flora or a list of plants is written, it's out of date. New things are found, new ways of organizing plants are developed because of DNA sequencing and research that people do. So the Jepson manual, literally a 2.5 inch thick book with very thin paper and very small writing at the time of its publication in 2012, listed every single plant in the entire state that was known. And locally, we're very lucky to have a flora or a list of plants that is focused on Monterey County. The Monterey County Illustrated Field Key. This was actually first published back in the 1990s and then revised in 2016 by this gentleman, Michael Mitchell, who also, and let me go down. Oh, this is I'll go back to this one. Michael Mitchell, also published this Monterey County Wildflowers, a field guide. This is very specific again to our county. It's a really, really useful reference. And I encourage you all to see if you can find a copy. I know they sell it at River House Books and they sell it at the PG Museum, which I'm not sure if either of those are, I think River House Books is open right now. But one really cool thing about this local field guide is that it's arranged by color. And I took a shot of the edge of the book as I folded it over, so you can see the different colors of the plants that it includes. Now, I'm going to go back a slide and focus on this book for a moment. You can buy all kinds of really, really specific books that are tailored to your particular interests. This is a field guide to Manzanitas. It has, you know, many, 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 many different species of Manzanitas that have maps and descriptions of where they occur, descriptions of their structure, whether they're fuzzy leaves, whether they're sticky leaves, what the branches look like, all that kind of thing. But if you want something specific to Monterey County, I really encourage you to get this particular book, the Monterey County Wildflowers. Now, this book also is associated with this particular website, MontereyWildflowers.com. I mentioned this last week, an amazing compilation of photographs and very short written descriptions. The index has scientific names, common names, and colors. If you haven't perused this website, it's a gold mine. I really encourage you to do that. And it builds upon the book that Michael Mitchell wrote. Now, Michael Mitchell's book, arranged by colors, this is the pink color, right? It's got a lot of nice, really cool pink, in this case, onions. These are 4 different onion species that occur in Monterey County. I can see that by just looking at the title, onion. Oh, but here at the top, it has the onion family, the Alliaceae. So not only is this book arranged by color, but it's also arranged according to families. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So here's page 16, page 17. The organization of the book is by color, but also alphabetical by families, groups of plants. Let's go down to the next page, page 17. Goes on to 18 and 19. After the onions, the Alliaceae, the next family in this particular book is the dog vane family. Apocynaceae. Okay, it's like it's getting a lot of fancy titles and names. This is the sciencey stuff that is, again, foundational to understanding how to identify plants and using a reference like this particular book. Understanding how it's organized will really facilitate your identification of plants. So the Apocynaceae has things like milkweeds. That's cool. You got 2 different milkweeds here in this book. There are others that occur in the county. Actually, there's 3 different ones, but hey, Apocynaceae, the next family is the Asteraceae. And we talked about those last week. The sunflower family, the daisies, and the thistles, and weird stuff like Madias, the Asteraceae. Here we are in the yellow section of the book. Oh, I know what this is right off because I know this is a collection of flowers called an inflorescence, which is a typical flower organization of the Apiaceae, the carrot family. All carrot flowers occur in inflorescences or groupings of flowers that are really small, like this. So this book is organized by color, but also alphabetically by family. And then within each family, alphabetically by the genus of something, the genus. Again, organizing plants, refining how they fit together. Used to be based on structure, way back when Linnaeus
Swedish, I guess, sort of a botanist, decided he was going to try to organize plants into groups based on how they looked. Well, today we do it not only based on how they're, structured, how they look, but also on their genetics. And getting at least a fundamental understanding of that will really further your understanding of how to organize plants. The Primulaceae, the primrose, moving into the Rosaceae. Here we've moved back into a pink category. The roses. There's 3 different ones in this book. Rosa californica, the genus. Rosa, the species Californica. Oh, and then this one, ever so slightly different. Rosa, the genus, and Gymnocarpa, the species, ever so slightly different. And then pine rose. Rosa, the genus, and Pinetorum, the species. Ways to organize and group in from larger to smaller categories. So how do we know these are roses? Well, we studied the arrangement of the flower parts. They all look vaguely the same. They all have petals in groups of 5. They all have these really numerous stamens, or the male flower parts that have pollen on the anthers. Oh, but we also know this is a rose based on the structure of the leaves. This grouping of leaflets on a leaf. And I'm going to go down a page. Oops. We know this is in the rose family, in the rose genus. We don't know exactly what kind of rose yet, but we know these are roses because the flower and the leaf parts are diagnostic. Yeah, here's a leaf with all these little serrations. We talked about the margins last week. It has a mid vein, and the veins are arranged in a certain way. The leaflets are opposite on the stem. They're arranged opposite each other where they attach. And again, all these are diagnostic, and they tell us that in this particular case, we're looking at the California wild rose, Rosa californica. In the family, the broader classification, Rosaceae. And this is just a really pretty picture. I really like it. Now, what about getting even finer? Well, here's 2 different roses. Oh, okay. We know they have prickles. Rosa californica, the California wild rose, has these sort of recurved prickles. They kind of curve over. And Rosa gymnocarpa, or the wood rose, has these really straight ones that kind of almost sit on a pedestal or something. I'm not sure what you call that. Ever so slightly different. You have to get up close and personal to really look at the plants, to really get down in deep and take a look at their diagnostic features. So the rose family, we're going to start off with this one and go through a number of other families. They all have similar characteristics. Roses can be trees, shrubs, smaller than shrubs, or herbaceous forbs. A forb is just a flowering perennial or annual plant, like a wildflower is a forb. Roses can live all year long and be perennial year after year after year. Or members of the rose family can be annuals. They grow from a seed, mature, flower, set seed, and die all in 1 year. That's a strategy to drought conditions or to Mediterranean summers where we have no rain, or desert conditions, annual lifestyles. Now, all members of the rose family have the same thing here. All their flowers are attached to this little saucer-shaped thing called a hypanthium. It's just like a little holder that holds all the flower plants. Now, representative plants in the rose group, we've seen a bunch of photos. Here's another picture of a rose, a pine rose. Another member of the rose family is Toyon, that has these wonderful berries. Christmas berry. I know you guys have a lot of this up in the preserve. Another member of the rose family, sure doesn't look like a rose, is chamise, one of those sort of indicator species of inland chaparral, or sometimes maritime chaparral. Now, what groups all these things together and make them roses is their flowers are identical. Their flowers all have similar characteristics. Here's a flower of the Toyon. You know, it has a holder at the bottom. It has a lot of stamens, groups of 10. In this case, it has 10. It has the same kind of pistil or female flower shape and part as the classic rose that you get for Valentine's Day. In this case, the leaves are serrated and they're kind of cool. How come it's not advancing to the next slide? There we go. So we're going to talk about plant families. Talking about roses, we'll talk a little bit about peas, all the families in California, and there are many of them. There's tens and tens and tens of different kinds of plant families. But the common ones that you guys are going to see and enjoy most of all on the preserve are grouped into some that are very familiar to us. The most common plant families in California, there's only 5. Sunflowers, the Asteraceae, that's the scientific name of the sunflower family. The grasses, the Poaceae. The peas and legumes, like lupins, the Fabaceae, and I always think of them as fabulous, Fabaceae. I ate a lot of burritos in college, and we used to make our own pinto beans. Beans are legumes, and they were fabulous. And that's the way I remember. Little mnemonics like that always helped. Mustards, the Brassicaceae, the 4th most common family in the state. And sedges, the Cyperaceae down here, indicators of wetland environments. They require damp soils. So these are the 5 most common families. It accounts for the majority of all the plants in the state. We talked about aster structure last week with these complex composite flowers. Every single aster is composed of similar features like this. Every single one. Some are more, how do I say, complex than others. Here's a sideways view of a sunflower. Each member of the Asteraceae family has a flower with a single seed. You know, we all eat sunflowers. That's the single seed of a composite disc floret. Here's all the female and male pollen producing parts. Now, some of the members of the Asteraceae thistles have only the disc florets. They're composed primarily of these inner petals and inner, well, not petals, they're actually flowers. And some, like this one, have, you know, the forget-me-not disc, or excuse me, ray florets, very complex. Artichokes are a thistle. They're a member of the sunflower family. They have these exact same structures. In here is the receptacle. Over here are the bracts. We actually eat the bracts. In the composites, they're actually called phyllaries or phyllaries, very specific structural term for them. And on the inside, the disc florets that turn bright purple when they mature. All composite flowers. Look at how beautiful this one is, Madia elegans. It's the classic sunflower type of Asteraceae with these really cool lobed petals. It's just a stunningly beautiful flower, very common later in the summer on the preserve. Thistles, a little bit different looking sunflower family with these phyllaries that support these funny little threads, these cobwebby features on the inside, kind of an adaptation to reduce moisture loss and keep the sun from beating down too hot on some of the more sensitive plant parts on the inside. All members of the Asteraceae family, when they mature, the seeds have these sort of umbrella-like parachutes that loft the seeds into the air, making them transported by the wind. It's a mechanism for dispersing seeds. Very classic of dandelions. Here are more composite members of the Asteraceae family, hard to believe, but yarrow. Each one of these teeny tiny little flowers in this inflorescence, the collection of flowers, is a classic little daisy. Golden fleece doesn't look like it'd be a sunflower, but it is. It has all those typical features of the sunflower family. Same with pineapple weed, a non-native weed that when you crush it really does smell like pineapple. It kind of looks like a pineapple. This is a little bit bizarre in that it doesn't have the ray florets, the petals that stick out that are typical. It's the most complex. It's also the most prolific, the most common in terms of numbers in the state of California. Vast areas composed of single species. There are goldfields, Lasthenia californica, really cool. The ray florets, the disc florets in the middle. Each one of these rays and each one of these disc florets is an individual flower in the composite flower. It has a little receptacle here, kind of a holder with these what look like bracts that are in this family called the phyllaries or the filaries. Here's it looking in cross section where you see the single seed of the disc floret. And if this was bigger, you could eat it like a sunflower seed. Now, the second most common family in the state, the grass family. We're not going to get into the grasses. They're very complex. They have their whole set of unique vocabulary words. The thing that's really cool about grasses is that the flowers are really small and green and inconspicuous. They're hidden inside these little compartments here that are called spikelets. They're small and green and inconspicuous. They don't have to attract pollinators because they're pollinated by the wind, picking up their pollen grains and depositing their pollen grains on other members of their grass species. They don't need something like a bird or an insect, a bee, or even a person or an animal to pollinate it. The pollen is carried on the wind. Therefore, the flowers are really kind of inconspicuous. We have weedy, non-native species that are prevalent, like rattlesnake grass, Bryza maxima. It really does look like the rattles of a rattlesnake. It's actually really cool looking if you look at it up close and personal. We also have on the preserve really important remnant stands of the California native bunchgrass, purple needlegrass, Stipa Pokhra. Purple needlegrass happens to be our state grass. Who knew we had a state grass? Purple needlegrass, these individual bunches can be hundreds of years old, and their roots can be 20 feet deep. They are adapted, they're resilient. They deal with our hot, dry Mediterranean summer when we don't have rain, when plant water need is at its greatest, but plant water availability is at a minimum. So they have deep, deep, deep roots adapted to tapping moisture at depth. Grasses have their own terminology. Like I said, we're not going to really talk about them. They don't have stems. They have blades that wrap around a sheath with a little joint here called a ligule They have hollow stems and nodes. Anyway, whole different terms, different kind of structures that define what tribe various grasses are in. Elymus is a tribe. It has sort of this shingled look to the inflorescence, the collection of flowers. Giant wild rye, another Elymus that grows in huge patches the size of like a VW bug. They're really big grasses. Here's a close-up of the individual spikelet that holds the flowers of purple needlegrass, Stipa Pokhra, and our most common grass, which happens to be a non-native invasive. It's growing at the detriment or to the detriment of native species from the Mediterranean region, wild oats or Avena fatua. All of these members of the grass family, the Poaceae. All right, now the fabulous peas, the Fabaceae. Now look at the old name, Leguminous. Here's legume, right there, legume. Most family or most members of this family have these really kind of bizarre asymmetrical flowers. They have very typical flower parts. They all have 10 stamens, which are the male reproductive parts of a flower. Their leaves are usually compound, meaning there's not just one leaf, but many leaflets in a grouping. Interestingly, their roots have nitrogen fixing nodules, which can take atmospheric nitrogen out of the air and make it bioavailable for the plant. When the plant dies, those nitrogen fixing roots in the soil decompose and release nitrogen into the soil, acting like a fertilizer. So legumes, members of that Fabaceae family, are often used as a cover crop in rotational agriculture because you grow the cover crop, you let it die, you often mulch it into the soil, but it's those nitrogen fixing roots that have pulled atmospheric nitrogen out of the air, releasing that nitrogen into the soil once the plant decomposes, that actually acts as a fertilizer. It's really important, actually, also restoration work where you're dealing with relatively sterile soils after a disturbance, like in a mine or in a development after a construction project is done. You can introduce these legumes, these members of the Fabaceae family, clovers and lupin, things like that, to help build the soil, to help add fertilizer in a natural way. Representative genera, representative genus, the plural genera are lupins, lupinus, and clover, trifolium. That doesn't really look like a lupin flower, but it is. All these individual flowers arranged in an inflorescence. Same with the lupin. Oh, but the thing that binds them together, every single member of the Fabaceae family, is that their seeds occur in a pod. Beans and peas and lupins and clovers and vetches and all those things all have seeds that occur in a pea pod. They're very cool. Individual seeds in little like compartments, all arranged, and in this case, a lupin seed pod that's really hairy. It's just very interesting. Okay, back to the flowers. We all looked at sweet peas with their incredible fragrance coming on now. Here's a close-up of one of our non-native invasive weedy species that I know there's a lot of time spent on the preserve trying to eradicate this. French broom in the genus Genista. It has classic pea family flowers. They have this big petal in the back called a banner. It's like a banner. Here we are, a banner. It has these two other petals on the sides that are called wings. They kind of flap in the breeze is kind of how I remember their wings that flank the banner in the back. And in the middle, they have two petals, usually very tightly compressed together, called a keel. And it's called that because they're often compressed together in such a way that they make a very sharp point on the base where the petals touch, like a keel of a boat. And inside that keel is where the female flower parts are, looking to collect pollen from the male pollen parts. So all the female flower parts, the reproductive parts, are inside that keel, often kind of hidden and protected. Typical of the legumes, these compound leaves that are composed of a number of leaflets together, collectively called a compound leaf. Here's a compound leaf with a different kind of structure. Many leaflets arranged in an alternating fashion. I'm going to start using these words more and more. Here's a classic keel, very sharp, beautiful harlequin lupin with a yellow banner. It's just really interesting. And pink wings and keels. Gully lupin, another one that's very common on the preserve, with its inflorescence, with these kind of stacked up flowers in the group of flowers called an inflorescence. Vetch here on the top right, it's a pea flower. It has these kinds of compound leaves that twine all over everything with these little tendrils, but it has these classic, very hard to see unless you're looking really close, pea-shaped flowers. There are more members of the Fabaceae, members of the legume or pea family. These clovers, look how different they look, totally different, but they're all members of the same family. These are all native ones on the top. Here are three more. They look vaguely similar. This one sort of has a round inflorescence like the Rancheria clover. This one has a more spiky inflorescence, kind of like the narrow leaf clover. This one has sort of a round one too, like the pinpoint clover. These are all non-native clovers on the bottom, non-native clovers. And there are lots and lots and lots of clovers. Now, mustard family. What's very cool about this one, look at the old name, Cruciferous. This is coming from the word crucifix. Crucifix, like a cross. And indeed, every single member of this family is shaped with flowers are shaped like a cross. Every single member of this plant family, remember it's the like fourth largest family in the state. Every single flower in this family has only 4 petals, and they're always very symmetrically arranged like a cross, the crucifix. This particular one has clasping leaves, the field mustard. There's acres and acres and acres of this non-native mustard. Here's another wild radish, non-native. We have this on the preserve. It's got 4 classic mustard-shaped flowers. Seeds are either kind of short and squatty or long and thin, like the shepherd's purse, these little cute things that open up along this middle vein to release the seeds. We talk about cruciferous vegetables. Cruciferous vegetables are all in the Brassicaceae, the mustard family. Kale, broccoli, cruciferous vegetables. These, just like the wild radish, just like the field mustard, all have alkaloids and compounds that are, in the case of broccoli and kale, good for us to eat, because these phenols, these alkaloids that the plants have naturally, are adapted to repel herbivory or adapted to repair or to repel animals that might nibble on these plants. So they have these internal chemicals that in the case of the things that we like to eat because they're good for us are developed by this particular group of plants in this family to repel not only herbivores and herbivory, but pests too, insect pests. It's just a really interesting kind of thing that we can relate to stuff we get at the grocery store, we grow in our garden that occurs naturally in nature. Typical of this family. Patterns, different kinds of seed shapes, different kinds of long, skinny, short, squat, every single flower in the entire family, always with 4 petals. Now the cypress, this sedge family, we're not going to get into it, very complicated, very hard to identify. Yet they have kind of typical classic shapes, things that occur in wetlands. Sedges and rushes are actually in a different family, but sedges and tules that occur in swamps and marshes, that kind of stuff. So other families, pine family, trees, occasionally shrubs, they all have a really nice resinous aromatic smell. Every single seed of a member of the pine family is born in a cone. They're monoecious, a scientific term meaning that male and female flowers occur on the same plants. We'll look at cones in a minute. The needles are modified leaves. This family doesn't have leaves per se. They have modified leaves that were developed over time, long eons of time, to withstand very cold temperatures. They were fundamentally evolved actually during a much colder time on the earth when plant evolution was happening, worldwide conditions were much cooler. Now they're restricted to either cold places like alpine conditions or northern or boreal areas, latitudes in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, or to very damp, cool environments like our redwoods along the damp, cool California coast. Anyway, they're modified leaves, these needles are just indicative of their evolution, actually. Pinus, a representative genus here with fascicled needles in a little bundle, and Douglas fir, individual needles held on the stems. Other conifer families, the one most common here in California, the Cypressaceae family, which includes both cypress and redwoods. Cones in this family, monoecious, both male pollen producing and female seed producing cones occurring on the same tree. This happens to be Monterey Pine, which has the genus Pinus in the Pinaceae family, the species radiata, a descriptive term that describes how the cones radiate around the stems. These scientific names are either Greek or Latin, which is really the collection of languages that are used in science, Greek or Latin. The genus is a more broad term. The species is generally an adjective or a descriptive term. Lots of material here, huh? This is the sciencey stuff. That again is just the foundation. And once we get through this, then there'll be lots of other stuff to absorb and really enjoy. Mint family, aromatic, often having square stems, often with opposite leaves, or in this case of the black sage, whorling leaves that sort of twirl around the stem. They have these really interesting bilaterally symmetrical flowers. Very unusual. All the petals are sort of clumped together and connected. Very interesting. Descriptive. There's another family, the Buckwheat family. You have lots of different buckwheats, many on the preserve. They have very, very small flowers, and you need a hand lens to really appreciate. This is probably the size of a peppercorn. Very, very, very small flower, but exquisite with these orange tipped, pollen heavy anthers connected to the base of the flower with these long filaments, the filaments and the pollen bearing anther comprising the stamen, all the petals arranged with these really cool green stripes. I mean, you wouldn't see that unless you had a hand lens and really took the time to delve in, get up close and personal. The buttercup family, the Ranunculaceae. Everybody knows a buttercup, right? But what about a larkspur and a columbine? Those are members of the same family. Really complicated flowers, super complicated flowers, yet they're members of the same family. So not only structurally do they look similar, you know, if you got down and you counted the number of stamens, you know, they are genetically related way, way back on their family tree. The Heath family, Ericaceae, I like these because they're Manzanitas. Manzanitas with these classic little urn-shaped or campanulate, bell-shaped flowers. This one happens to be huckleberry. Huckleberries have these same bell-shaped flowers as Manzanitas. All kinds of different structures. Here's a sand mat Manzanita, which is in the same family as our madrone trees. Madrone trees, big, beautiful, with these smooth red stems and trunks, have the same kind of flowers as Manzanitas and huckleberries, these urns or bells. Oddly, rhododendrons and azaleas are in the same family, yet they do not have the same kind of campanulate or urn-shaped flowers where the leaves are all, the petals are all fused together. You can't identify individual petals, but genetically, these are all related. Interesting. Carrots, each carrot family member has the same kind of structure. They all have these umbrella-shaped or umbel-shaped inflorescences that are the collection of these teeny tiny little flowers. And they all have these clasping kinds of sheathed bases, these sheathed leaves that are highly dissected. Look at how finely dissected these are here. And unfortunately, this particular non-native weedy species, poison hemlock, is a member of the carrot family. It has all the classic indicators of the carrot family, these highly dissected leaves that look just like carrot leaves, these umbel inflorescences with their collection of teeny tiny little flowers. Here's the umbel, all these pedicels, these little stems originating at a common base, a sheathing base here with the leaves that go up and a root like a carrot. And unfortunately, this is occasionally mistaken for wild carrots and consumed. It causes immediate damage to the liver and requires hospitalization in order to do some kind of liver cleanse. People who ingest this and they don't seek medical attention immediately often don't make it. So just be aware of poison hemlock. It's a member of the carrot family, the Apiaceae. It has all the classic things that you see when you look at a carrot. But the diagnostic feature of this, these purple spots on the leaves and on the stems. And this is the plant that the ancient Greeks made into a concoction to kill Socrates. when the powers that be in the Greek city-state at that time, the Greek government, decided that Socrates was working and I don't know if he was preaching, but talking on the steps of the Parthenon or wherever he was in a way they didn't like. So they murdered him and they concocted a potion made of this plant, poison hemlock, which is native to the Mediterranean region and Greece. And when I look at these purple spots here, which are the diagnostic feature of this plant, the diagnostic feature of this toxic member of the carrot family, these spots remind me of the blood of Socrates. So don't forget that. If you see something that you're not sure about, look for the purple spots of blood of Socrates. I know it's gross, but helps me remember. Okay, the lily family, Liliaceae. Woo, flower parts in threes. You always have 3 petals. And sometimes they have 3 things that look like petals, but they're not. They're actually modified sepals. They're modified parts of the plant that hold the flower. The bud, as it opens, reveals the flower. The bud is composed of sepals. And in the case of many members of the lily family, these parts of the bud, the sepals, when they open to reveal the actual 3-petaled flower, look identical. So they have a special name. They're not sepals, they're tepals. Anyway, flower parts in 3s, 3 petals, 3 tepals, 6 stamens in there. They always have parallel veins on their leaves. They're members of the fundamental division in the plants called the monocots, as are the onions in the Alliaceae, which is how we started this discussion. The onion family, they all look similar. They all have flowers, each one of these individual flowers in an umbel, right? In a inflorescence that's shaped like an umbrella. They all have a bulb or a rhizome underneath. They often have a very pungent smell. But here's something that looks like an onion. It's not. It's a native orchid. And we do indeed have native orchids, many of which are found here in Monterey County. And you have at least 3 or 4 different species of orchid that occur on their preserve. Each little tiny flower, and this one is probably half the size of my thumbnail. Each little tiny flower is this perfectly formed, exquisite orchid flower. This particular one with the green is actually a federally endangered orchid that occurs in the Monterey Pine forest areas, here on the Central Coast, and also in maritime chaparral. It's really cool. This one, this orchid, is called Spiranthis, and each little individual orchid flower on this, what's called a spike, spirals around the stem there. It's Spiranthis, it spirals. Just very cool. Okay, so now I've burdened you with thinking about plant families. I wanted you to get a grip on the fact that plants are organized in these families. And once you kind of get a clue as to what the families are, you are 10 steps ahead in plant ID if you want to get serious about plant ID. But even the very cool reference book that we like to use, The Wildflowers of Monterey County, yeah, it's arranged by colors. That sure makes it easy. But within each color, it's organized alphabetically by family. So if you have a clue as to the color and the family, you go to the beginning of that color or wherever that color is alphabetically, or excuse me, that genus is alphabetically in that family alphabetically, and it becomes easier to use those references. Now, all those very thick books like the 2.5-inch thick Flora of California, the Jepson Manual, every single plant in the state as of 2012, now it's all online. It's all arranged in the same way, by family, alphabetically, and then within each family by genus, alphabetically. Same with the Monterey County flora, the flowering plants, the key, as they call it, to Monterey County plants. It's all arranged by family, alphabetically, and then within each family by genus, alphabetically. So if you get serious about plants, that's what you have to embrace. But what we're going to do starting next week is really talk about what you can expect to find in different habitats. Because if you know what habitat you're in, you know what ecosystem you're in, you can predict what kind of flowers you're going to see. And you can find books that are dedicated to those particular kinds of regions. So if you're in the Sierra Nevada, you're not going to find plants that you find in the California desert. You're just not. You may have the same families, you may have similar genera, but you're not going to have the same species because plants are indicative, they're indicators of their various environments. Same with the redwood forest. You're not going to find plants that you find in the desert in a redwood forest. So when you're in a redwood forest and you start identifying plants, you can kind of hone in on what species you can predict you'll find. And if you organize your thinking about that, focusing on the habitat, you're again 10 steps ahead. If you know what habitat you're in and you find a mystery flower, if you know what kind of features to expect in different families, you go, oh, this looks like it might be a member of the Apiaceae, the carrot family, because it has an umbel-shaped inflorescence. It has these really feathery kinds of leaves. Oh, and it has a clasping leaf structure at the base and a long taproot if you dig it up. So you know you're in that family. So you go to that section in the book. And then if you're looking at colors, ooh, you go to that further section in the book and you hone in more and more and more refined. Oak woodlands, same thing. If you see an oak woodland or you're in an oak woodland, you have shady habitats under the oaks. You have grassland habitats. You're thinking ahead as to what plants you may eventually encounter. Now in the summer, it's going to look one way, and in the winter, it's going to look different. Now I have a collection here of sky lupin and California poppies and different grasses. I know I'm in a grassland habitat because I'm not going to find this in a desert. I'm not going to find this in the Sierra Nevada. I might find this in an oak woodland, but not under the oak shade, the canopy shade. I'm going to find this in the grassy areas in between, or maybe a pocket meadow in a grassland habitat. Here on Monterey County's coastline, we have maritime chaparral. I can predict what plants I'm going to find there because I understand what that habitat's all about. I understand what plants are indicators of that particular environmental context, so I can narrow down my focus. Same with the mixed evergreen forest. Here we are at the top of Palo Colorado Road up at Botcher's Gap, which is closed right now, looking out into the Los Padres National Forest. In the grassland habitat here on the lower right, I might find certain things that I know I'm not going to find in the redwood forest that lines the canyons. I can see so much about the environment just looking at the collection of ecosystems or biomes or habitats that occur in this image. And I can predict what plants I'm going to find. Palo Corona Regional Park, a view that all of us can admire from Highway 1. Same thing, grassland, I know what I'm going to find. Coastal scrub, I know what I'm going to find. Maybe not a lot of wildflowers, but a lot of flowering shrubs. Same with these scattered Monterey pines in the Monterey Pine Forest that's on the other side. I know what I'm going to find. Oak woodland, different stuff. So we know how to use references because we're beginning to understand families. We're beginning to understand how plants are structured and the diagnostic features that sort of clue us into what roses are going to look like and carrots are going to look like and peas are going to look like. We're beginning to understand some of the more technical terms for the surfaces, the margins of the leaves, you know, whether the leaves are opposite or alternate. And then next week, we're going to pull it all together and talk about sort of the habitat perspective and what we might see in different habitats. And I'm going to leave you guys there. My last slide for the evening was looking at this collection in the book again, way in the back of the book, in the yellow section of different Asteraceae. Ooh, but this one isn't an aster. This is a carrot. And yeah, same kind of structure. Carrot structure. Leaves that are really sort of dissected and feathery. An umbel-shaped inflorescence with tiny, tiny little flowers. If I was to dig this up, I'd have a nice carrot type of root. And then different types of sunflower family members that in time you'll probably see someday. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now that I've completely like blown you guys out. That was a yawn, I know.